Hello and welcome to this episode of ISJ Leaders in Security podcast series. I'm your host, Eve Goode, and I'm the digital content editor for International Security Journal. Today, I'm joined by Deep Alert's Jasper Horrell, founder and chief innovation officer, Ryan Bromfield, head of product, and Howard Harrison, chief executive officer. This episode will focus on how the role of Agentic AI is transforming the video surveillance industry. Jasper, Ryan and Howard, it's a pleasure to have you on today's podcast. How are you all doing today?
We are doing good. Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Looking forward to the session.
Amazing. So it's great to have you on the podcast and to get our listeners a little bit more familiar with you and the company. Could you start by telling me about Deep Alert and its role within the current security industry, please?
Deep Alert is a video analytics company. We sit in between CCTV cameras and typically control rooms, and we add an intelligence layer in between those two elements to really highlight to the control rooms what's important and what can be ignored. Mostly focused in the security industry, but there's applications of this technology in broader vertical domains as well.
Okay, great. So to kick off the podcast, I firstly wanted to ask all three of you a general question. Could you start by telling me how you would define Agentic AI and what it means in terms of video surveillance?
All right, I'll start there. There's a broad range of definitions of Agentic AI and video surveillance. But really what it has come to mean in the market these days is applying LLM technology, large language model technology, or VLM technology, video language model technology, to get a deeper and richer understanding of what the camera is seeing, and then being able to sort of reason around that and make decisions and consult deeper data sources to really work out how important this particular event is. Is it a health issue? Is it a safety issue? Is there a fire? Or is it just something quite normal like somebody walking their dog? So it's the application of human-like intelligence in AI form to really reason and use richer data sources to come to better conclusions.
Yeah, and I think from an agentic perspective, there's obviously multiple I think Jasper touched on that, multiple definitions of what agentic AI might be. But I think in our space, it's pretty much the orchestration of, obviously there's a large pool of data coming from CCTV. It's the ability to then reason with that data. And then I think Jasper touched on that as kind of the final grounds, which we're not really there, but ability to act on that. So either dispatch or kind of create a security event. At the end of the day, in the video surveillance space, agentic AI is just making operators respond faster and make a more informed decision. The ability from an orchestration perspective is able to pull data from multiple data sources. So site SOP, site history, looking at actual context of those cameras and then making an informed decision, which a human operator would do, but naturally now with agentic AI, it's able to do that in a lot quicker manner, if I can put it that way.
So from my perspective as the commercial lead in the business, I think agentic is definitely the buzzword in 2026. Our focus, and definitely my focus, is delivering outcomes that people be willing to pay for. So our focus is Deep Alert is to partner with alarm monitoring centers in 6 different countries, and we work in their control rooms. We understand their pain points and their workflows, and we want to empower them with technology that genuinely impacts their bottom line. And there's great outcomes that we can deliver with agentic that will help drive much better efficiencies with our partners.
Great. Well, I'm really looking forward to hearing how the role of Agentic AI is actually transforming the video surveillance industry today. So, Jasper, back to you. Could you just tell me, from an innovation standpoint, what limitations in traditional video analytics pushed you towards developing more Agentic AI systems?
When we first started the business more than a decade ago, it was really at the advent of image classification using deep learning. So deep learning is a form of AI, or a form of machine learning, and it was able to get kind of deeper scene understanding than was sort of possible prior to that. But it was still quite limited by simple classification. So object detection, is the person, is the vehicle, that kind of thing. Prior to that, it was even more kind of algorithmic based. So sort of motion of pixels and motion triggers, that sort of thing, which were used to determine whether something should be looked at. So the real limitation there is that you don't have very rich information from that kind of analysis. You have a certain level, and it can get you so far. But the new technologies, agentic technologies, and the ability to interrogate a scene much more deeply and understand the context of the scene. Is this a shopping mall? Is it an interior office space? Would we expect to see a vehicle here? That kind of thing, consulting the site history. That's what allows us to do something much more powerful these days, which is to apply these new technologies to the video analytics. And it's really a combination not only of the LLM type technologies, but it's a combination of that and algorithmic approaches. You need to be really quite careful how the whole lot is sort of packaged together to get the accuracy, to get the performance, to get the cost. I'm sure Howard will talk more about the cost. So it's important to try and deliver the whole thing in a quite a cleverly packaged way to make sure that we're getting that deep scene understanding and that we're getting the sort of nuances of human understanding into the decision making.
So before we move on to speak to Howard about the cost, Ryan, from a product perspective, how do you translate Agentic AI into something practical and usable for customers that are on the ground?
Yeah, I think from a practical perspective, you first need to understand the process or the human behavior you're trying to replicate. So from an agentic side of things, is how are we tweaking that agent to kind of replicate what an operator would be doing in the real world. You kind of need to map that process to see kind of what that operator, the data points it's capturing, how they actually get to their final decision when they're making that judgment call up. Is this a risk? Is this not a risk? What are we going to do? Once you've mapped that, we then identify which metrics we can improve in that. So either we're going to support that workflow by providing maybe just an alert, give some categorization from a risk perspective to an alert, or we're going to kind of replace that. I think long term there is the risk of replacing that. And then kind of we'll unpack that later where kind of humans feed into that. But I think Jasper touched on a critical point is the costs associated. How do you make it usable? And there's always going to be a trade-off there. I think Jasper touched on some of our pre-filters, and I think at the moment that's how we're going to make it practical, is using pre-filters to drive down the cost. LLMs all need GPUs, all need high, they're costly to run. So in the interim, we need to make that practical for our customers. They don't have the budget at the moment per se. It's not that we want to replace operators, we want to support operators and create capacity in these organizations. So that's kind of our motto at the moment, is very much support operations, support our customers, and also work with them. We're not security experts. We need to understand what our customers are actually doing in order to develop these solutions.
Yeah, so cost definitely seems like it's a main player in everything that you do. Finally, going on to Howard. Howard, from a business and industry view, why is now the right time for organisations to invest in more autonomous surveillance solutions?
So I think the reason I joined the business is there is this perfect storm to now at the moment. Currently is a really exciting time in the AI security space. So first of all, camera infrastructure is everywhere. Organizations have invested in cameras. There's too much footage, though. There's just too much noise, and so most of the camera feeds, there's not enough human attention to the cameras that have scaled. So footage goes unwatched. Organizations are paying for infrastructure that isn't leveraging the data that's there. Up to now, cameras have been a system of record and reactive at best, but with AI, they can be far more valuable to the business. And then the second piece, and the piece that Jasper talked about, is AI is matured now. There's an accuracy level and a reliability you can get out of AI that wasn't available to us before. And then the third thing is that labor constraints in every industry has become acute. Especially in the UK and Europe. And so you can't simply, that's a challenge we're seeing with all our customers, is labor shortages in security are a real issue, as well as training and retaining key talent within the business. And so AI has to pick up and do more of the heavy lifting and can make jobs much more inspiring and interesting than it was possible before. There's also regulatory forces at play. So there's more regulatory and compliance requirements that businesses are seeing, which are tightening, which are putting pressures on companies and making it more difficult for them to offer the same returns. Insurance providers are are also requiring that there's more surveillance taking place. And so there's many forces that are driving businesses. Clearly businesses are seeing the impact of AI across the stream. So all boards are mandating that companies have to be investing in AI. But this is one of the most pragmatic areas for businesses to be investing in AI, because the returns are proven and are clear. And so our job is to work with companies to ensure that they do get a return on investment.
It's interesting to hear, actually, because there is a noticeable gap in the security professionals that we see today. And the way you worded that, it's like AI is picking up the slack. So it was really interesting to hear it from that perspective. So, Jasper, I wanted you to elaborate slightly on how these systems have become more autonomous. So what are the biggest technical challenges in moving from detection to true decision-making AI?
I think one of the first things is that these kind of systems are inherently complex. There's video analytics. To do that well requires a level of sophistication in your systems that makes it quite complicated to get it right and to get it robust and to get it to work well. So the sort of technical challenges around that are, particularly with this new form of decision making and going deeper into the understanding of the scenes, is that you have not just a simple sort of input-output, an image comes in or a sequence of images, you classify it, you pass it through a rules layer, and then you alert or you don't alert. That's sort of how it used to be. But now we've got deeper sources of information that we can apply to the decision making. For example, what is the history of the site? Does this normally happen at this time of day? Or is that kind of vehicle one that typically appears there, that sort of thing. And then there's a sort of a deep scene understanding. So dealing with that sort of richer set of data sources, getting that to work well, where it's sort of more fuzzy. Like we know that large language models, they reason on more sort of nuanced, fuzzy data. It's not so black and white, it's not so algorithmic. And then making that reasoning robust. We all know that decision-making in AI is not always very consistent. But in our industry, in the kind of business that we're in, it's mission-critical stuff. It's 24/7, lives are at stake. So you've got to really make sure that you engineer your system really well to make good decisions. So I think that's a key technical risk, is to build a system that does deliver that level of performance and accuracy that the customers require. And then to do that in a cost-effective way, as we've mentioned it already, is a key thing. But also just to get the pure performance out of the system. You're dealing with a lot of data, you're passing it into models that themselves are large, there's processing time involved, you've got to keep that down. You're trying to do real-time analytics and alerting. So it can't come 3 minutes later. It's got to take a few seconds at most to get that result and get the decision making. So all of those together create quite a lot of technical challenges, and I think all companies working in the space are working through that at this point. And then there's another whole factor, which is the fact that AI is moving so fast. So what you build this month may need to change in 2 months' time, which may need to change again in 2 months after that. As technology is moving so fast, we're seeing this incredible rise of AI and the increase in capabilities. And it makes sense to kind of keep track with the best performing models, the latest sort of stuff, which is at odds with a sort of an industry where you're trying to produce mission-critical, reliable, very stable systems with known characteristics. So that there's that trade-off between that and all the new capabilities, which are just so much more powerful and really very compelling to use. You can't really ignore them. Your customers are asking for these new things as well. So there's a lot of complexity there in terms of how systems are built and engineered, and putting that all together. It's quite complicated. One maybe advantage side of it all is that because the systems are complex, which is what I started saying, in the future you can see that the clients aren't going to need to understand the complexity of the systems. The language models and the AI can abstract that away, and humans can interact with the systems in much more human, intuitive ways, by speech or simple ways, asking what they want, getting reports, without needing to understand every single setting in the system and which button to press and that sort of thing. So I think from that perspective, it makes the systems easier to use and allows us to bring in this greater complexity and greater power, but in a way that is very usable. And that's also a real key change in the market. But it needs education for our existing clients who maybe some of them are quite traditional, been running certain ways for a very long time. And now you have this whole new interface or way to interact with the system and configure it and report on things, prioritize things. So the market is in for quite a shake-up around all of that. AI is moving fast, and it's dragging everybody along with it at high speed, and it'll be interesting. I mean, maybe we should talk a bit more about that, but I think some companies are going to do well in that environment, those that are more entrepreneurial, some of our customers, and some of the others are going to struggle. It's a difficult transition to make, not only for a tech company like ourselves, but for our clients is really quite tricky.
Based on Jasper's answer and the wider security market, we've seen that convenience is a top priority for customers now. So how does reducing false alarms and noise in video data unlock the potential for more automated agent-like responses?
Yeah, I think Jasper touched on the complexity of the system building these systems out is extremely complex, and with that complexity comes not just kind of engineering skill set or like an expense from that side of things, but also just the pure cost of the GPU load to kind of process these requests. So in order to, again, to highlight cost, not to go back there, but having a pre-filter to only send relevant data to these agentic kind of reasoning layer makes it, first of all, affordable for our customers. And then the second part of it is, like, from a false alarm filtering perspective, we're speaking about reducing the volume of events, but a big part of false alarm filtering is accuracy. So without having an accurate pre-filter, we won't build trust with our customer base. Specifically, Jasper touched on our customer base being mission critical. So if you don't have a pre-filter that can detect something, you're not building trust with the operating or the operations team. And then from then, obviously, if you don't have that initial layer, having that trust right at the end to kind of automate everything, it will just fall apart. So just to revamp, having a cost-effective solution that's extremely accurate as a pre-filter, so that's the false alarm filtering layer, only leads to accuracy from an agentic perspective. And I think that's where us as a business is extremely strong, because we have so many years in that kind of pre-filter layer, so we can work with low resolution images all the way to high resolution images. And that makes us also, if we build the trust with our customer and automate a lot of that layer and support it, it also allows their businesses to scale. And I think that's our goal. And I didn't really touch on that, but that's something, kind of the two metrics we're focusing on is humans are going to make mistakes in this space. They do make mistakes in this space, and we want to reduce that human error rate as low as possible. And then we spoke about efficiencies being agentic in the video surveillance space is very much about how do we go through all that noisy data and pull out what's valuable for a specific operator. And that's kind of the goal at the end of the day. So I guess just to sum it up, a false alarm is just our base. And I think we're extremely strong in that base. And that's how it unlocks the kind of the agentic reasoning layer.
So Jasper and Ryan, you both touched on this slightly, but Howard, which industries or use cases are seeing the most immediate impact from agentic AI? And where is adoption accelerating the fastest?
So, Eve, many say, I think every sector is being touched by AI. The obvious use cases are in critical infrastructure and utilities, energy grids and water treatment, often where they're often remote environments. These businesses have already heavily invested in cameras and sensors. And so AI is allowing them to move from being passively monitored to proactively working out where there is anomalies, and this can be handled 24/7. In retail and logistics, loss prevention is a real issue and a focus, and these businesses have very fine margins, and so there's lots of adoption happening in retail. The sector that we're very focused on third-party surveillance, I mentioned earlier in terms of labor shortages. These businesses, they don't make money from blind alarms generally, but CCTV is where these businesses are making money, but in their case, they have to reduce the noise. And so this is where AI has an important role. And so where we're seeing adoption accelerating generally is where there's already a large installed camera base. Industries where it's very obvious what the economic drivers are and that are facing labor shortages and inflation. I mean, the inflation we've seen the last couple of years has been significant, and so businesses are having to reduce cost in areas. And also there's sectors where insurance incentives are rewarding businesses for putting AI monitoring in place. And the last factor, I guess, is that I believe, you're seeing in Europe in the next couple of years, we know crime seems to be getting worse and worse. There's a lower risk tolerance to crime, and these are all factors that are driving quicker adoption to AI, that are moving agentic AI from being something that was interesting in the past to becoming something that's becoming business critical and indispensable in a business.
Okay, so how will people interact with these systems in the future?
That's a really interesting question, because we're seeing massive changes in how people are interacting with computing in general. With the large language model technology, it started with just a sort of a blank web page with a prompt, like, what do you want to do? But now those systems are, through that very simple interface, are able to deliver, updates to spreadsheets, updates to this, build reports, make a dashboard, write some code. All of that is done through a very, very simple human interface. So we believe, and I'm pretty sure most of the market does too, that this type of technology that's emerging very fast on the world stage in AI is going to radically transform how people interact with their computing devices in general and make it a much more powerful and intuitive experience. Our job within Deep Alert is to accelerate that within our own products so that we also make our own systems very simple to interact with, but also very powerful. The systems underneath the hood are very powerful. There's a lot of data. You can ask all kinds of questions. You can get reports on this. You could optimize your sites. A lot of things are possible through this kind of technology. And it can be delivered in a very simple way, which almost requires no human training. So in the past, you'd have to go through sort of training academies and certifications and a lot of long period of learning to understand how best to optimize these systems. But now all the power lies in the agents themselves, in the LLMs themselves, in the training that's provided around that. So the end user doesn't actually have to know about how this thing actually really works underneath the hood. They can ask and it can tell them. But they can mostly just focus on what do they want to get out of the system and can it be tuned for their applications. And I think most people will understand that from interacting with things like ChatGPT and Claude and other models, and can imagine systems in the future where it really is that simple to interact powerfully with complex systems like ours or others. So I think that's our job. Ryan, what do you think from the product perspective? You spend your life thinking about product. How are we going to interact with Deep Alert in the future? And do you think it's going to be more like a mobile device kind of interaction where you just talk in a simple interface? Do we need big web pages anymore and big displays?
Yeah, so it is a difficult one to predict where we're moving with this, but I like your thinking around, if I have to make a prediction, I'd say there's probably going to be different agents for different verticals and specific industries. So at the moment, we're very rule-based, so you're creating specific analytics rules to generate an event. I think over time and very rapidly already that in these specific environments that you can get enough information from an LLM to kind of make a call. But I think it depends on verticals, but if you say residential monitoring, you would have a specific agent that monitors your house for you or your business for you, and you as an end user will interact with your CCTV monitoring agent. And like you suggested there, Jasper, like you understand your environment that's being monitored, you'll be able to create and engage with that agent and be like, this is my schedule, these are where my family comes home, only alert me on these things. So it'll be obviously there'll be a generalized understanding and a very specific prompt, but I think the logic that I'm saying is that there'll be, to say, very specific verticals for agents. So residential, I think we deal a lot in the self-storage agent. Public safety would be completely different. I think the biggest issue that we run into from a Deep Alert, I think it ties to one of the previous questions, is actually just getting access to this data. So you can have an agent, but being able to orchestrate that and get all these data points to make a decision is difficult.
It's likely, I think, Jasper, you touched on it, it's likely that the interface is going to be more and more via mobile, because you don't need big, there'll be much more simplicity in the display, and I watch how my kids interact with AI. They have their phone permanently on while they're doing their homework, which probably means that half the answers have been coming from ChatGPT, but actually it's like an assistant to their brain. It's amazing how it's changing the way our brains are thinking. It's definitely making us lazy in certain areas. We think that the displays will become much more intuitive, and as Jasper said, there won't be lots of training required because very quickly you'll be able to understand and ask questions where you don't understand, and everyone will come in at a different level of experience. So it just makes these things much more intuitive than. So UX is really important, is that making these things uncluttered and really easy. And that's where mobile probably lends itself. And definitely in an enterprise environment, a mobile solution works better. As you get fewer and fewer monitoring centers, a lot of businesses will just be able to monitor on a mobile phone.
Yeah, sorry, I think to add to your part is very much a chat. It's either mobile or web, it's just a recording of your voice of what you're looking for. At the moment, it's all manually typed out. And I think in the future, it'll just be either import something that's already been done, or like you're saying, it's just you have a conversation with it through a mobile application. But yeah, I think to Jasper's point, the front ends are going to be similar to ChatGPT, to be honest, is where you've got the agent understands everything in the background, and you just kind of having one little single pane of glass to interact with, and you can basically prompt it for anything from a video point of view, be it data, be it rule creation.
Howard, how do you think, given the sort of development in these UX and the experience that the users will have with the system, where they can ask almost any question of the system, I'd like to alert on this, I'd like to alert on that. We see that as being very possible within a year or two, maybe shorter. How do you think that's going to impact the business strategy of businesses like ours? We have a certain market we targeted at present, and we build tools, and we're quite focused on that. But if your system can actually do much more, it must be quite difficult to come up with a commercial strategy that will evolve in that sort of loose way as the technology allows new things to happen. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I just think businesses have to be incredibly nimble. I mean, for us as a business, and I've only been at Deep Alert 3 months now, so forgive any naive comments I've made today, but I think it's moving at pace. But what is clear, I guess, with everything we're doing is that our lens is on the business and how we leverage all these pieces. So I think I guess it's just the way businesses have to do it is they just have to be, I guess they have to trust the technology to a degree. I think they have to recognize that some legacy systems, that they have to make some bold decisions in terms of investing in the right areas going forward. It's a really exciting time in technology, but it's also a scary time because it's daunting because there's so many things to be done. So I think it's a combination of being scary but also being exciting at the same time.
I think you're quite right. It's incredibly exciting. I mean, there are things you can do now which you couldn't do 2 months ago. It's amazing.
I think Jasper also just to chip in there, I think tech's moving so quickly, but at the end of the day, if you're adding value to an organization, that's where the commercial kind of driver lies, is that if you're developing a solution, that it sounds illogical, but if you're not developing a solution targeting a specific commercial pain point, then it's highly unlikely that you can have a sophisticated solution. But if it's not solving something in these organizations in the short term, and also there's the argument that these problems may be only going to exist in 3 years' time, which is completely different. But in the short term, if you're not finding that value driver or that cost saver or that, unlocking efficiencies, you're not really going to grow or scale your product commercially. So I think fundamentally it still boils down to finding that pain point, solving that pain point effectively and in a cost-effective manner, and your commercial model should scale.
But solving it in a different way. I read research last year that a lot of the investment in AI wasn't seeing a return, and a lot of the execution there was that companies were leveraging AI to do things exactly the same way that were done before. But as Ryan said, if we focus on what the economic drivers or the unit economics, is looking at it in a simpler way, how do you achieve those better outcomes? It's kind of re-architecting your work environment and the systems and how they interact with controllers. I mean, it's daunting for people coming into the sector or coming in to find, what careers will look like in the future. I think that's but I think these are the businesses and individuals have to be nimble.
I think the key point you've raised there is that we've got to keep delivering value. So the technology is incredible. You can build almost anything really quickly. But the key point is, can we identify and unlock the business value for our clients? If we can't do that, then the business isn't going to do well.
We can see in the industry and, the wider security industry, that some customers are cautious when adopting integrated AI or AI solutions. So, Jasper, as AI becomes more agentic, how do you approach questions about trust, control, and ensuring the system behaves reliably in critical situations?
Yeah, Eve, that's a really good question. Ryan touched on some of that. We're taking a sort of a steady, kind of cautious approach to introduce